when my own flesh and blood and his entitled wife secretly sold my vintage 1968 Cadillac Eldorado. For a quick bag of cash, they thought they were pulling a fast one on a helpless, forgetful old lady. They actually popped champagne over their easy money, completely forgetting that I am the woman who built this family's entire empire from the absolute ground up. They forgot who holds the keys to their trust funds. And very soon they are about to discover that every single penny has been drained. My name is Loretta. I am 68 years old. For decades, my late husband Thomas and I worked side by side, turning a single beauty supply storefront into a highly successful nationwide African-American hair care and cosmetics brand. We worked long nights, poured our sweat into every product, and sacrificed our own comfort to build generational wealth for our only son, Jamal. Since Thomas passed away, I stepped down from running the company. I handed over the daily operations to trusted partners, so I could finally enjoy a quiet life tending to my garden and attending my Sunday church services in absolute peace. To protect our legacy, I placed the bulk of our wealth into a strict trust, providing Jamal and his wife Chloe with a very generous but strictly capped monthly allowance. I wanted them to live comfortably without losing their drive. Instead of gratitude, that boundary bred nothing but pure resentment. Jamal is 35 now and Chloe is 32. Neither of them knows what it means to build a life from scratch. Over the past year, their visits shifted from loving family time to passive-aggressive interrogations. It began a few months ago during Sunday dinner. Chloe sat at my dining table swirling her expensive wine and looked around my beautiful estate with a heavy sigh. She flatly complained that their monthly allowance was simply restrictive, whining that they needed more cash to maintain their appearances. When I calmly reminded her that they receive more in a single month than hard-working families earn in a whole year, her face turned sour. She looked right at Jamal, expecting him to put me in my place. My son. The boy I would have given my last breath for looked at me with cold eyes and told me I was completely out of touch. He said I was getting too old to understand modern expenses. He even had the audacity to suggest that my home was far too large for a senior citizen to manage. He hinted heavily that it was time for me to downsize and hand over control of my estate so they could have the financial freedom they deserved. They spoke to me slowly, raising their voices, as if my age had suddenly stripped away my intellect. I sat at the head of the table, swallowing my heartbreak, watching them treat me like an expiring roadblock to their inheritance. I prayed their disrespect was just a fleeting moment of greed. I had no idea their entitlement was about to turn into a ruthless plot to steal everything I owned. Back in 1983, Thomas and I opened our very first beauty supply store on the south side of Chicago. We did not have wealthy investors backing us or fancy business loans from big banks. We had our entire life savings crammed into an old shoebox and a fierce, unyielding dream. I would stay up until 3 a.m, standing over a hot stove in our tiny apartment kitchen, mixing raw shea butter and essential oils to perfect my hair formulas. My hands were always stained from the rich ingredients, and my back was constantly aching from standing on unforgiving concrete floors. But I never uttered a single complaint. I remember the heavy smell of cocoa butter and peppermint lingering in my clothes even after I washed them countless times. Thomas ran the cash register by day, greeting every customer with a bright smile, and he stocked heavy boxes of inventory by night. We poured our blood, our sweat, and our literal tears into that single storefront. People only saw the glitz and glamour decades later when our brand expanded to thousands of retail locations nationwide. They saw the glossy magazine covers and the luxury cars parked in our driveway. They did not see the brutal years we spent eating cheap instant noodles just so we could afford payroll for our first 3 employees. We missed countless holidays, we skipped family vacations, and we worked right through our own wedding anniversaries without a second thought. We built our empire brick by brick because we had a sacred promise to keep. when I found out I was pregnant with Jamal Thomas, held my calloused hands, looked me dead in the eye, and swore our son would never have to struggle the way we did. We wanted to build an impenetrable fortress of generational wealth for him. We wanted Jamal to walk into any corporate boardroom and know without a shadow of a doubt that he belonged there. Every store expansion, every new product line, every single sleepless night reviewing accounting ledgers was exclusively for him. I clearly remember Thomas falling asleep at the warehouse desk, utterly exhausted, but smiling warmly because he knew we had securely paved our boy's future. When Thomas passed away a few years ago, my heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. The massive empire we painstakingly built suddenly felt unbearably heavy without my partner to share the load. I chose to step down as the active chief executive officer and handed the daily operations over to our trusted board of directors. I truly thought I had successfully finished my job on this earth. I thought the hard part of my life was finally over. I had built a towering legacy, secured my family from poverty, and prepared Jamal to eventually step up when the time was right. I just wanted to peacefully rest, tend to my rose garden, and watch the seeds of our lifelong labor bloom into a beautiful, secure future. But the absolute problem with building a massive fortress of wealth is that the people born inside it never learn how to lay a single brick themselves. Jamal is 35 years old now, and he grew up with a silver spoon so large it completely distorted his entire view of reality. He never saw the instant noodles or the calloused, stained hands of his parents. He only knew the elite private schools, the tailored designer suits, and the flashy luxury sports cars we bought him as rewards for existing. I sincerely thought giving him everything the world had to offer would make him deeply grateful. But it only made him severely disconnected from the very struggle that built his lavish lifestyle. Then he married Chloe. Chloe is 32 years old, and she treats our respected family name like an unlimited corporate credit card. She is the kind of woman who knows the high price of everything, but the true value of absolutely nothing. She is deeply materialistic, obsessed with flashy designer labels, upscale country clubs, and maintaining an image of flawless, immense wealth for her social media followers. She does not work a single day in her life, and frankly, she encourages Jamal to do the bare minimum at the company. Instead of motivating my son to take pride in the family business, Chloe constantly pushes him to demand more cash from me. She views me not as a loving mother or a pioneer who paved the way for their comfort, but as an irritating gatekeeper standing between her and a mountain of cash. Before Thomas died, we saw this toxic entitlement growing like a dangerous weed in our own backyard. We sat down together and decided we critically needed to protect the legacy from being squandered on frivolous vanity. So when I stepped down, I placed the vast bulk of our family wealth into a highly strict, irrevocable trust. The terms were ironclad to protect the money from reckless spending. I set it up so Jamal would receive a very generous but strictly capped monthly allowance. It was more than enough to live a beautiful, comfortable life without ever worrying about a single bill, but it required them to maintain some basic level of financial discipline. That boundary infuriated Chloe to her absolute core. Every single month, when the allowance hit their bank account, she would loudly complain that the amount was a direct insult to their social status. She hated that I held the keys to the main vault. She completely despised the fact that she could not just buy a third vacation home or charter private jets on a whim without my explicit approval. She would continuously whisper pure poison into Jamal's ear, convincing him that I was controlling and overly strict for no reason. She made my own son believe that he was being unfairly deprived of his own money. They simply refused to understand that the trust was deliberately designed to ensure the wealth would last for future generations, not just for one long weekend of showing off to strangers. Their bitter resentment grew thicker and darker with every passing day, completely blinding them to the reality that they were aggressively biting the very hand that fed them their luxurious existence. The shift in their behavior did not happen overnight. It crept into my home like a cold draft through a cracked window. Sunday dinners, which used to be my absolute favorite time of the week, slowly morphed into exhausting interrogation sessions. Chloe would sit at my mahogany dining table, picking at the soul food I spent all afternoon cooking, and complain endlessly about the high cost of maintaining her social circle. She would sigh heavily, making sure I heard every single word about how their friends were buying summer homes in the Hamptons, while they were supposedly stuck living on a tight budget. A tight budget, mind you, that equated to a mid-six-figure annual allowance from the strict trust Thomas and I built. Jamal, instead of correcting his wife and reminding her of her blessings, would chime right in. He started making passive-aggressive comments about my home, the very estate where he took his first steps, and where his father and I poured our hearts into every brick. He would look around the grand foyer and tell me that a house this massive was simply too much for a woman my age to handle. He would say it was the safety hazard that I was bound to trip on the marble stairs, and that downsizing to a small, manageable condo would be the most responsible choice for my health. He actually had the nerve to suggest that maintaining the beautiful landscaping and the pool was draining funds that could be better utilized elsewhere. By elsewhere, he clearly meant his wife's endless designer handbag collection and his expensive golf club memberships. They treated me like a relic, a fragile old woman who was merely taking up space and standing in the way of their ultimate financial freedom. They honestly believed I was too oblivious to see through their shallow concern. I kept my mouth shut, sipping my sweet tea, watching them carefully. I let them think their little seeds of doubt were taking root, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. The ultimate disrespect. The devastating blow that truly knocked the wind out of my chest happened on a crisp Sunday morning. Since Thomas passed away, my greatest comfort was taking my vintage 1968 Cadillac Eldorado out for a slow, quiet drive along the coastline before church. That car was not just a piece of metal. It was the very first luxury item Thomas ever bought for me after our beauty supply business hit its first $1 million in sales. It was pristine, painted a beautiful pearl white, with red leather interiors that still smelled faintly like the rich cologne my husband used to wear. I walked down to the climate-controlled garage, my keys in hand, ready for my Sunday ritual. But when the heavy garage door rolled up, my heart plummeted straight into my stomach. The spot where my beautiful Cadillac had sat for decades was completely empty. There was nothing but a bare patch of cold concrete and a few drops of old oil. Panic seized my chest. I thought someone had broken into the estate and robbed me. I immediately pulled out my phone and dialed Jamal, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the glass screen. When he answered, I was nearly breathless, telling him to hurry over and call the police because someone had stolen my precious car. But there was no shock in my son's voice. There was no urgency or concern for his mother. There was only a chilling, highly rehearsed calm. He let out a long, dramatic sigh and spoke to me in a slow, patronizing tone, the way you would speak to a confused toddler. "Mum," he said, "please calm down. Nobody stole your car. Do you not remember our conversation from last week? You explicitly told Chloe and me to get rid of it. You said it was getting too difficult for you to steer, and that you really shouldn't be driving a classic car at your age anymore." I stood there in the empty garage, frozen in absolute disbelief. I had never uttered those words. I had never even entertained the thought of letting that car go. I told him exactly that, my voice rising with righteous indignation. But then Chloe got on the line. Her voice dripped with that fake sugary sweetness she used whenever she was plotting something wicked. "Loretta, honey," she cooed. "We are really getting worried about you. You looked me right in the eye and handed me the spare keys on Tuesday." Your memory is really slipping lately, and it is honestly terrifying for us to watch. We just want you to be safe." They were actively gaslighting me. My own flesh and blood and his greedy wife were trying to make me believe I was losing my mind. They wanted me to doubt my own sanity. I felt a cold, hard knot form in the pit of my stomach. I realized right then and there that this was not a simple misunderstanding. This was a highly calculated attack. They had sold my most treasured possession right out from under me, and they were using my age as a weapon to cover their tracks. They genuinely thought I was a helpless, confused senior citizen who would eventually just accept their false narrative and surrender to my supposed mental decline. I ended the call quietly apologizing for my poor memory. I let them hear the defeat and confusion in my voice. But the second the line disconnected, the tears in my eyes dried up, completely replaced by a blazing, quiet fury. What those two arrogant fools did not know was that I am not some helpless old lady, and my mind is as sharp as a diamond cutter. Just a month prior, I had hired a top-tier security firm to completely upgrade the camera system around the entire estate, including high-definition lenses hidden right inside the garage. I marched straight into my home office, booted up my computer, and pulled the encrypted footage from Tuesday night. The truth played out on the screen in glaring, undeniable color. At 2 a.m, the heavy garage doors lifted. There was Jamal, my own son, walking side by side with Chloe. And right behind them was Bradley, Chloe's older brother. Bradley is a white American man who runs a notoriously shady luxury used car dealership on the other side of town. I watched as Bradley hooked my pristine 1968 Cadillac up to a heavy-duty flatbed tow truck. Jamal and Chloe stood there laughing, practically high-fiving each other in my driveway, as they watched my husband's cherished legacy being hauled away into the darkness. The absolute betrayal radiated through my veins, hot and unforgiving. But the final nail in the coffin came 2 days later. Jamal and Chloe came over for dinner, pretending to check on my failing memory. I excused myself to the kitchen to fetch dessert, but I paused in the darkened hallway just outside the dining room. They were whispering, but their voices carried perfectly in the quiet house. I heard Chloe giggling, telling Jamal that Bradley had already fenced the Cadillac to a private collector for $75,000 in untraceable cash. She was gleefully talking about using their cut of the money to book a lavish month-long vacation to the Maldives. But it was Jamal's response that completely shattered whatever maternal mercy I had left in my soul. He told her the car was just the beginning. He laid out their ultimate plan with terrifying precision. He said that since I had already accepted my memory lapse regarding the car, they could easily build a documented history of my dementia. Their ultimate goal was to use my supposed mental decline to have me declared legally incompetent by a judge. Once they had legal guardianship, they could break the irrevocable trust, bypass the monthly allowance, and take total control of the entire cosmetics empire Thomas and I had bled for. I stood in the shadows of my own hallway, listening to my son plot my ultimate destruction. They wanted to erase my independence, lock me away in some facility, and feast on the fruits of my lifelong labor. In that dark corridor, the mother who loved Jamal unconditionally died, and the fierce businesswoman who built a nationwide empire from a single storefront was resurrected. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of deception. They had no idea they had just awakened a sleeping giant. I knew that if I confronted them with my anger right then and there, they would just scramble to cover their tracks. They wanted an old woman whose mind was fading, so I decided to give them exactly the performance they were banking on. The very next morning, I called Jamal. I made sure my voice trembled just enough to sound vulnerable, adding a slight quiver that any loving son would instantly recognize as fear. I told him how terribly sorry I was for overreacting about the car. I spun a tale about how my memory must really be slipping, just like Chloe had said. I wiped the corners of my eyes as if I were about to cry, asking them to please be patient with me. I even let out a small, defeated sigh and admitted that I had been feeling a bit overwhelmed lately, asking if they could come over more often to help me manage things. Jamal swallowed the bait whole. His voice instantly shifted into that sickening, patronizing tone he had perfected. He told me not to worry about a single thing, that he and Chloe were there to take the burden off my shoulders. He actually chuckled, a sound that made my stomach churn, and reassured me that stepping back from my responsibilities was a normal part of aging. When they came over for Sunday dinner 2 days later, I played my role to absolute perfection. I deliberately misplaced my reading glasses. I asked Chloe the same question about her day 3 different times. I even pretended to struggle with pouring my own tea, letting my hand shake so the liquid spilled slightly onto the saucer. Chloe watched me with a glint of absolute victory in her eyes. She patted my hand with her perfectly manicured fingers, exchanging triumphant knowing looks with my son across the dining table. They were so blinded by their own greed and arrogance that they could not see the quiet storm brewing right behind my eyes. They were literally dancing on my grave while I was still breathing. I watched them eat the delicious food I prepared, drinking the expensive wine my late husband had stored in the cellar, completely oblivious to the fact that they were digging their own graves. By the end of the evening, they left my estate completely convinced that I was rapidly declining. They thought I was totally subdued, ready to surrender the keys to the empire Thomas and I had built with our literal blood and sweat. But the moment their luxury sports utility vehicle pulled out of my massive wrought iron gates, my trembling hands became rock solid. The confused, fragile elder they thought they had outsmarted vanished into thin air. I walked straight into my home office, locked the heavy oak doors, and prepared to unleash a level of devastation that they could not even begin to fathom. Behind closed doors, I was no longer a grieving widow or a disappointed mother. I was the ruthless businesswoman who had conquered the fiercely competitive beauty industry. My first phone call was to my estate lawyer, a sharp, brilliant woman named Cassandra, who had protected my family assets for over 2 decades. Next, I conferenced in my wealth manager, David, who oversaw every single dime of the multi-million-dollar trust. I did not shed a single tear as I laid out exactly what Jamal and Chloe had done. I told them about the stolen Cadillac, the recorded security footage, and their sickening plan to declare me legally incompetent. Cassandra was absolutely furious on my behalf, but she reminded me of a brilliant legal safety net my late husband Thomas had insisted on weaving into the trust documents years ago. Thomas, bless his visionary soul, had added a strict morality and theft clause. It explicitly stated that if any beneficiary attempted to defraud, steal from, or maliciously manipulate the primary trustee, which was me, their access to the trust could be immediately and permanently severed at my sole discretion. It was an ironclad legal trapdoor, and Jamal had just handed me the legal right to pull the lever. I gave the absolute order without a single ounce of hesitation. I instructed David to legally sever Jamal as a beneficiary forever. I told him to completely zero out the massive monthly allowance they had been living off of. The trust fund they were relying on to fund their lavish lifestyle was completely locked down. But I did not stop there. I refused to let the wealth Thomas and I built sit idle. I ordered Cassandra to draft the paperwork to redirect the millions that were meant for my son into a brand new charitable foundation. We established a massive endowment designed specifically to provide full scholarships and seed money for young, brilliant bob and black female entrepreneurs. I felt a massive weight lift off my chest, knowing that Thomas' hard-earned legacy would not be wasted on designer clothes and pointless luxury car leases. I wanted the money we earned from our community to go right back into the hands of young women who actually knew the meaning of hard work and hustle. Women who would respect the grind, unlike the entitled boy I had raised and the greedy woman he married. By the time I hung up the phone, the complex legal machinery was already in motion. The financial umbilical cord that had pampered Jamal and Chloe for their entire adult lives was permanently cut. They were financially dead in the water, entirely cut off from the empire, and they did not even know it yet. My wealth was completely secured, untouchable by their greedy hands. But I still had one more piece of business to handle. They had stolen from my husband, and for that there had to be severe criminal consequences. To ensure their total ruin, I needed absolute, undeniable proof of the theft. I reached out to a highly reputable private investigator named Marcus, a retired detective who specialized in corporate fraud and stolen luxury assets. I handed him the security footage of Jamal, Chloe, and her brother Bradley towing my beautiful 1968 Cadillac Eldorado away in the dead of night. I gave Marcus a single directive to follow the money and leave no stone unturned. Marcus was thorough and relentless. Within 3 short days, he brought me a meticulously detailed dossier on Bradley and his shady luxury used car dealership. The report was completely damning. Bradley had indeed operated a completely illegal backroom deal. He used his dealership connections to bypass the proper title transfers and fenced my husband's classic car to a wealthy private collector out of state. The transaction was completed for exactly $75,000 in cold, hard cash. Marcus even managed to secure a copy of the wire transfers and cash deposit logs, showing how Bradley laundered the money, taking a generous $25,000 cut for himself, and quietly filtering the remaining $50,000 directly into a hidden offshore bank account that Chloe had set up just weeks prior. The sheer level of their premeditated deceit was staggering. They had mapped out every single step of this robbery. Armed with Marcus' thick dossier of wire transfers, the buyer's personal information, and the crystal-clear security footage from my estate, I made my final move. I made copies of all the documents, ensuring there was a backup safely locked in my personal vault. I picked up the phone and contacted a senior detective at the local police department. I did not mince my words or try to protect my son from the harsh reality of his actions. I sat in my office and officially filed a report for grand theft, auto wire fraud, and severe elder financial abuse. I handed over every single piece of evidence to the authorities, making sure to explicitly name Jamal, Chloe, and Bradley as co-conspirators in an organized criminal plot to defraud a senior citizen. The detective was completely stunned by the sheer volume of concrete evidence I provided. He assured me that because the value of the stolen vehicle was so high, and because it involved organized financial exploitation across state lines, the charges would carry severe felony mandates. Arrest warrants were quietly drawn up by a local judge. The police decided to bide their time, waiting for the perfect moment to execute the arrests, so none of the 3 conspirators could flee or destroy further evidence. Everything was perfectly aligned. The trap was set, the jaws were locked, and my ungrateful son and his treacherous wife were blindly walking right into the center of it. They were busy planning a lavish international vacation with stolen money, utterly clueless that their luxurious house of cards was about to be burned to the absolute ground. 2 weeks later, Jamal and Chloe decided to celebrate their impending trip to the Maldives by hosting a massive, incredibly expensive dinner party. They rented out the private dining room of the most exclusive upscale steakhouse in the city, inviting all their high society friends to drink expensive champagne and feast on prime Wagyu beef. I knew exactly where they would be, because Chloe could never resist bragging on social media about every single move they made. I timed my arrival perfectly to ensure maximum exposure. I did not wear the comfortable floral dresses I usually wore around the house. I put on a sharp, tailored black suit, my favorite pearls, and the fierce red lipstick I used to wear when I sat at the head of the corporate boardroom table. I looked exactly like the woman who had built a nationwide empire from absolute scratch. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant, flanked by my brilliant estate lawyer Cassandra, and two armed uniformed police officers. We bypassed the hostess completely and marched straight toward the private dining room in the back of the building. As we pushed the double doors open, the sound of loud, arrogant laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses spilled out into the hallway. Jamal was standing at the head of a long mahogany table, holding a glass of expensive champagne, boasting to his wealthy friends about his upcoming luxury vacation. Chloe was sitting right beside him, draped in flashy jewelry that I had ultimately paid for, smiling like the queen of a castle she never built. When the heavy doors swung wide open, the entire room fell dead silent. The boastful smile on my son's face instantly evaporated, replaced by a look of utter confusion and sudden dread. Chloe's jaw practically unhinged when she saw the two police officers standing tall right behind me. Jamal quickly tried to recover his composure, attempting to put his mask of fake concern back on in front of his wealthy peers. He lowered his glass and took a hesitant step forward. "Mom," he said, forcing a highly nervous chuckle. "What on earth are you doing here? Is everything all right? Are you feeling confused again? Do you need me to take you back home?" He actually tried to gaslight me one last time in front of a room full of people. I did not blink. I did not waver. I stood incredibly tall, feeling the absolute strength of my ancestors coursing through my veins. "I am not confused in the slightest, Jamal," I said, my voice cutting through the thick silence of the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. In fact, my mind has never been more clear. I am here to personally deliver your going-away presents before you pack your bags for that tropical vacation you think you are taking. The guests began to whisper nervously, completely captivated by the unfolding drama. I gestured for Cassandra to step forward. She pulled a crisp white envelope from her leather briefcase and handed it directly to my son. Jamal opened it with trembling fingers, his eyes darting frantically across the official bank letterhead. "What is this?" he stammered, the color completely draining from his face. That I replied smoothly is a certified statement showing the current balance of your irrevocable trust fund. You will notice that the balance is absolute zero. As the primary trustee, I invoked the morality and theft clause your late father wisely drafted. You are permanently severed as a beneficiary. Every single penny has been legally redirected to a charitable foundation. You are cut off, Jamal, forever. Chloe leaped up from her expensive chair, her face contorted in pure panic. "You cannot do this," she screamed, her voice echoing off the restaurant walls. "We have a lifestyle to maintain. We live in a luxury penthouse. How are we supposed to pay for our home?" I reached into my own purse and pulled out a second legal document, dropping it right onto her empty dinner plate. "You do not own that penthouse, Chloe. The holding company owns it, and I own the company. That piece of paper is a formal 30-day eviction notice. You will pack up your designer bags and vacate my property, or the county sheriff will throw your belongings out onto the street." The guests stared in absolute horror as the glamorous facade of Jamal and Chloe's life collapsed right before their eyes. Jamal tried to speak, tried to formulate some pathetic excuse, but one of the police officers stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Mr. Jamal and Mrs. Chloe," the officer said in a booming, authoritative tone, "we have a warrant for your arrest for grand theft, auto wire fraud, and severe elder financial abuse." Chloe started crying hysterically, protesting that it was all a huge misunderstanding. She cried out for her brother, shouting that Bradley would clear everything up immediately. I looked her dead in the eye and delivered the final devastating blow. "Your brother cannot help you, Chloe. Bradley was arrested at his shady car dealership 20 minutes ago. The police already have the security footage, the wire transfer receipts, and the offshore bank records. We know exactly how much you sold my husband's classic Cadillac for, and we know exactly where you hid the stolen money." The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent dining room as the officers restrained my son and his greedy wife. They were publicly humiliated, stripped of their fake wealth, and facing years behind bars. As they were marched out of the restaurant in front of all their stunned friends, Jamal looked back at me, tears streaming down his face, finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of his betrayal. They thought they could feast on my legacy by treating me like a helpless old fool. Instead, they lost absolutely everything, crushed beneath the weight of the very empire they tried to steal. It has been exactly 6 months since that dramatic night at the restaurant. I am currently cruising down the beautiful sunlit coastline in my brand new, customized Rolls-Royce convertible. It is a stunning deep sapphire blue with a pristine cream leather interior that puts my old Cadillac to absolute shame. The warm ocean breeze feels like pure, unadulterated freedom. I am thriving, living my life in total peace, and fiercely protecting the magnificent legacy my late husband and I built from the ground up. The charitable foundation is already flourishing, handing out substantial scholarships to brilliant young Black women who actually understand the true value of hard work and dedication. As for Jamal and Chloe, their daily reality looks completely different now. The criminal justice system did not take their fake entitled tears lightly. They are currently facing severe felony convictions and are avoiding actual state prison time only by the skin of their teeth through a highly strict, punishing plea deal. That deal requires them to pay massive legal restitution to the estate. My son, who used to wear tailored designer suits and complain about a 6-figure allowance, is now wearing a stiff polyester uniform and working a grueling minimum wage shift at a local hardware store. Chloe had all her luxury designer bags seized by the authorities and now works at a fast food drive-through just to help cover their massive court-mandated payments. Their glamorous life was completely stripped away, leaving them with the harsh, unforgiving reality of the real world. They learned a very painful but entirely necessary truth. Never mistake a mother's quiet grace for weakness. We built the table you eat at, and we can pull the chair right out from under you. If this story resonated with you, honey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know down in the comments. Where are you watching? From what time is it there? And what would you have done if your own blood tried to cross you like this? Would you have shown them an ounce of mercy, or would you have delivered the exact same fierce justice that I did without a single second thought? I absolutely love reading your honest thoughts in the comment section below and connecting with all of you who truly understand the deep sacrifices we make for our families. Your continued support means the absolute world to me, and it helps me continue sharing these highly powerful life lessons. We have to constantly remind each other of our enduring strength and our undeniable worth every single day. Do not ever let anyone make you feel small in the beautiful house you built with your own 2 hands. Stay blessed, stay strong, and protect your peace at all costs. See you in the next one.